So when we look at these words, you shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy. These are some of the most famous words in the Torah. People put these words sometimes over their sanctuaries, their synagogues, at the entrance. These words to remind you, Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy. So when we behave in a holy way, we are imitating God. Imitatio Dei, as they call it in Latin, behaving like God. And so what does it mean to be like God in Judaism? It's to be holy. It's to be kadosh. God expects us to be holy. And so this isn't just for the priests. It says right here, speak to the whole Israelite community. So this isn't just priests. These are every single person is meant to be holy. Now, this is not the Ten Commandments. We know that. You know that. But this was also, according to the Torah, given to us at Mount Sinai. And in the context of, we could say, how important this is. After reading the last few weeks, we've read about some laws like keeping kosher, what to do about skin diseases, etc. Now we're about to, and we also read last week about who we're allowed to marry and who we're allowed to consort with. Now we're getting into a whole bunch of laws that they appear in several places. We read one of them. After the Ten Commandments, we read in Parshat Mishpatim, in Exodus 21, we read that whole list of laws, right? This is another set of laws. And then we have another set of laws in Deuteronomy. So we encounter groupings of laws that seem to be, some people have said, maybe different traditions of laws that were part of the covenant that we had. Here, it's less part of a covenant. It's less in covenant language. You do this, and then God will do this for you. What we call like a contract or an agreement, a covenant. These are a lot more, this is what you do, which seems to be a little bit more like the Ten Commandments to some extent. And also, if you think about it, from the standpoint of people within the book of Leviticus, these laws that are teaching us to all kind of be like holy people, like priests, you'll see that what this covers, it's going to cover a whole bunch of stuff. Now, the first commandment, the first one of these laws, and again, I want to say, these are all part of the 613 commandments. So in the 613 grouping, these laws are no different than the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are 10 of the 613. These are also commandments in the 613. So here we go. One of them sounds a lot like one of the ones that we have in the 10 commandments. You shall revere your mother and your father and keep my Sabbaths. I am your Lord. Revere your mother and father. So let's just take a look at that with the Shabbat, right? It's almost, again, it's one line. It combines two of the commandments. Actually, two commandments that in the Torah are right next to, in the 10 commandments, are right next to each other. Commandment 4 and 5. So here, they're also grouped together, but they're slightly different. And the word is a little different too. You shall revere your mother and your father. Now, you know, in the 10 commandments, it says, honor your father and mother. The order is different. There it says you're supposed to honor your father and mother. And here it says you're supposed to revere your mother and your father. So the rabbis, of course, asked the question, why the different word? And of course, why the reversal? Why is mom put before dad here on this list? In this version, right? So what's the answer? What do you think is the answer that the rabbis gave 1,500 years ago or 2,000 years ago in the Talmud? Why do you think they say God reversed it here? I mean, this is God's commandments. So in one place, God said it one way, and the other, God said it the other. Okay, but why honor your father first and here revere your mother first? Anybody? Why is it reversed?
Takes care of everything. The household, everything.
Okay, sure, but why the reverse? Why is it different? I mean, look, we don't know. It could just be the way the Torah says, but the rabbis aren't going to say that's just the way it is.
Father was always the first one, that he was the head of the family, he told everybody what to do. And, that kind of stuff, and he told the mom what to do, but.
Okay, so then,
later on, he
Adam
had
came
things-
before Eve.
okay, but so why does it reverse it here and have the mom before dad here? Why? So honor your father and mother. Okay, but why is one and the other the other?
There'd be no life.
Okay, so Joanne just came up with a good one to make it equal, to balance it out. Well, I will tell you, that's not what the rabbi said. The rabbis didn't say that. Rabbis don't care about egalitarianism. 1,500 years ago, they weren't egalitarian. No, they had a reason for it. And it's interesting because it's an interesting, and I think it's true to some extent. Well, you may think it's not true, but this is what they said. And I think there's a truth to it. There could be. So it's this. And I thought this was kind of an interesting explanation in the Talmud. So the reason is that they give is that here, again, the word revere, the root for it is yirah, which also means to fear, to have awe, to be in fear of. Now it says, revere your mother and your father, meaning the mother first. And the reason the rabbis gave for this is because you need to, yes, well, no, because actually the opposite. You have to fear your mother more because you don't normally fear your mother more. So God said, fear your mother too. And honoring your father and mother, because you're more likely to honor your mother than your father, God reversed it so that you would compensate and also remember to honor your father. I know somebody's going to say, I was only scared of my mother, but in general, most people in those days and in many other days were also left with the warning, wait till your father gets home. So fearing your father was not as big of an issue. So the rabbis posited that the reason that God said it is reversed is because you generally don't do that. You generally would be more likely to honor your mother before your father, and you generally would be more likely to fear your mother over your father. So God reversed it. And that's their answer. And it's, again, to kind of teach us, not in an egalitarian way, but that both parents deserve reverence or fear and also honor. And what you say, well, what's the difference, right? There is a difference, right? There is a difference, which is why the Torah says it's not there for an accident. God didn't slip up and forget, did I tell you that? Did I tell you have to honor? No, it's something different. And so reverence can sometimes be based on, or fear can sometimes be based on fear, right? It can be based on not wanting to upset that person because of the consequences of upsetting them. So we behave in a certain way because of that. Honoring oftentimes it comes internally, not motivated by fear and by consequence, but I guess it could be, but usually it's not. Honor usually comes from something that's deserved or to some extent earned. And so people said, well, maybe we honor our mothers because we really respect them and understand the sacrifices that they made for us, et cetera. But our fathers do too. And when it comes to fearing and giving those mothers the same kinds of, with the exception of Mike, the same type of fear that we would give them, is we should also fear our mothers, not because we're scared of them necessarily, but because
I'm pretty scared of my mom.
that's what I said. No, listen. If I was ever gonna get the back of a hand, it was not from my dad. My dad never touched me, but my mom, would throw a shoe at me occasionally if I ran away or something. There was sometimes a shoe follow. I'm sure I deserved it, but anyways. But there was more likely, but this matter of fearing your parents or revering your parents is that they deserve reverence and they deserve honor. Some of it is due because of who they are and what they've done. And some of it is because you should also have fear of them and reverence of them because, again, for who they are and to some extent for what they can do, which is, be disappointed in you. They could, I guess in those days I can't say that today, but they could have whacked you You got out of line.
Never got hit.
So there you go. You never ever got hit? No.
Never.
Good for you. You deserved it.
It is pretty
You deserved it. But
bad. I know I did.
anyways, I'm not going to get into it. And again, you can't even say that anymore. I probably will get in trouble. Well, they've passed, so there's no consequences. No one's going to arrest them. But yeah, you wonder what will happen in the future with whether someone will be canceled because of that. But anyways. All right, well, that's that. Those are commandments 4 and 5. And look at this. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. I, Adonai, am your God. Well, that sounds a lot like the first commandments, the first 2 commandments, not to have any gods before me and not to make idols. So there's kind of commandments 1 and 2. We don't really have commandment 3 here about not blaspheming. It's not in those 1, 2, 4, 5. Here's another one though, but this one seems to be a lot about, well, it seems to be about sacrifice. When you sacrifice an offering of well-being to Adonai, sacrifice it so that it may be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, on the day following, but what is left by the 3rd day must be consumed by fire. If it should be eaten on the 3rd day, it is an offensive thing, it will not be acceptable. And one who eats of it shall bear guilt for having profaned what is sacred to Adonai. That person shall be cut off from his kin. So that's a law, actually, as you can see, quite long, about eating sacrifices in the proper way and offering the sacrifices. Probably, which is why it's called a pigul, an offensive thing. Pigul, that's the Hebrew word, pigul. And that means something that is not usable or something disgusting to some extent, pigul. So it is, it's a law about sacrifice. It's really not about the things that we see in Exodus. It's about sacrifice. Now, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of the field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, Adonai, am your God. And this is the law of what we call leket, gleanings, and also payot, the corners. So you're not allowed to cut the corners, and you're not allowed to pick up the grain after it falls to the ground. If you're harvesting it up and gathering it up, and some of it falls to the ground, that's for the poor. They get to come by and pick it up. That's their help. They get their charity from you, their support by having those gleanings and those payot. Now, of course, it says the corners. Doesn't say how much.
I was just wondering, what is the, like?
So the Talmud goes into how much of that is legit. How much of a corner can you say is still a corner while it's still a corner, right? So there are limits to how much you can cut back, and you can't just say, oh, I left a corner. So they do get into specifics, and they, of course, talk about, well, what if it's not really an angle? What if it's a circle? And so they talk about it as being a percentage. And so that's how we get to a tithe. We get to a tithe by saying that between the corners and leaving behind, we're gonna make sure that the poor get about 10%. Seems fair. I mean, it seems nice. It's a nice way of protecting the poor, but at the same time, if anybody told you you're going to pay a marginal 10% tax rate to carry the poor, people would go, I'm up for that. I'll do that. It's not a 30% sales tax. That's not a 40% tax rate, income tax rate. It's a 10% for the poor. So there you go. That's what you have to do. Now, of course, the word payot also, or payas, on the corners of your hair. So we haven't gotten to that yet. We haven't gotten to the shaving part, which we will. We'll get to that in the Torah. We'll get to not cutting your hair like the Canaanites. But of course, the rabbis say it's not just not cutting the corners of your hair, or shaving the sides, but leaving the corners of your hair reminds you of the laws of payot. So when you have payas, it's not only because you're not cutting your hair on the side like a mohawk, but that you're also reminding yourself of the mitzvah of payot, of caring for the poor. So even if you're not a farmer anymore, having payos reminds you that you're keeping some for the poor, which is nice. Let's look at this next law. You shall not steal. Now, we've had that before. That's in the Ten Commandments. Lo tignov. It's actually the same words. Lo tignovu, which is plural, you shall not steal. But it goes on a little bit more. Here, you shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. So there's a little bit more to that than just not stealing, because they realize that theft isn't just taking something from somebody, their property, or you're not stealing from somebody either surreptitiously or in robbery, but you also, by dealing deceitfully with somebody, you're also stealing from them. And we're going to get to some of those laws in particular. So that's real important. Not dealing deceitfully is connected to thievery, dealing falsely with one another. It's also kind of reminding us of the Ten Commandments of not testifying falsely against somebody, which is another way of dealing deceitfully with people. And then we get to another one of the Ten Commandments, which is a little different here, which is not there. It's not taking the Lord's name in vain. Here, it's not swearing falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. Now, some people feel that that's really what taking the Lord's name in vain means, which is not swearing by God and saying, I swear to God, I will do something. Not promising God's name, not invoking God's name as your guarantor. That seems fair. That's why we say we don't swear to God. Which would also, of course, profaning the name of your God would also be damning things too. We don't say that because that is taking God's name in vain and profaning God's name and not swearing by God's name. Those are all things that we see specifically in the Torah. Okay? The next law, you shall not defraud your fellow Israelites. So this is now spelled out specifically and linked to you shall not commit robbery, which is a different word than theft. Do they have to say it again? Well, I guess so. And they also, interestingly, kind of link it all together with the wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning. And this is a really important law in Judaism, which is you cannot withhold someone's wages. If you owe somebody money, now again, you say, well, people get paid every 2 weeks. Yes, because it's an agreed upon system. When you sign a contract with a job, it says when you're going to get paid. But if you're supposed to get paid in 2 weeks, or after 2 weeks, you're getting paid on the 10th and the whatever, and it's the 11th, then your wages have been held over. And that's against Jewish law. That's not allowed. Now, if you're an employer, you can ask and tell the person and give them a warning and say, look, we're falling behind and can't pay you tomorrow. We'll pay you the next day, and they agree on it. But if you don't tell the person and you just don't show up with the money, you have, again, they're linking it to robbery. And it's a serious issue. It's one that's mentioned in the Torah. This is a serious issue. So when synagogues talk about how they treat their employees, that's one of the things that obviously synagogues can't do is hold people's money beyond when they're supposed to get paid. So when we have a contract with somebody, we agree to pay somebody, we have actually an exceptional requirement to do that. So if we say we're going to pay somebody, we better pay them. Because we're a Jewish institution, we're supposed to be following this. But every Jewish person is supposed to be following this too. Does every Jewish person do that? No, but they're supposed to. They're following the Torah. So when people say, I want to follow the laws of the Bible, if you want to follow the laws of the Bible, that's great. That's the law of the Bible. So it's there with kashrut, it's there with the prohibition against homosexuality. It's also the way you treat your laborers. Now, here's a beautiful law, which you'd think would be pretty self-explanatory, but of course, it's unfortunately violated. This law is violated all the time. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am Adonai. It sounds like pretty bad behavior. And it basically says, implied that God's going to do something about it if you do it. God's going to get revenge, get vengeance on you if you do that to people. So, taking advantage of people who have disabilities goes against the Torah. I don't even know if can you say disabilities anymore? Differently abled people, whatever I'm supposed to say. The point is that the Torah protects people who have any type of handicap. I don't think you can say that word. I don't think you can say. I'm not sure. Does anybody know the reason? I know, but I think you have to say disability. I don't know. I don't even know if you can say disability. I'm not sure. Anyways, you understand my point. The Torah says you're not allowed to do anything that will harm or impede the ability for someone with any disability to function. And they talk about two. They talk about the deaf and the blind. Clearly, it's not just those. And so the Talmud goes on to talk about all the other things we can't do. If somebody can't walk well, we can't put, steps or difficult entryways in front of them. And synagogues, are some of the most compliant, ADA compliant facilities you can have, because we believe that we need to make sure that people don't have this happen to them when they come into a synagogue. It could be cold though. It'd be really cold. But that's for everybody. No, but yeah, but it's not, you're not supposed to in our lives. I mean, it's not just, obviously synagogue is one place we're responsible for in the Jewish community, but all of us are responsible for this commandment in our lives. And so there's a lot of applications to this today. And fortunately, we live in a society that also upholds this tradition, but there were cultures in the ancient world and up until fairly recently where people with disabilities were left to die.
Mhm.
The Torah says that not only do we have to protect people and keep them alive, but we have to make sure we're not doing anything to make their lives hard. So we take that very seriously. And we always have. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, but it's not always been obvious to people. You shall not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kin fairly. And this is a very famous line of the Torah. We've talked about it before. And everybody asks the same question. Did I just read what I just read? Is that really in the Torah? Did the Torah just say, don't favor the poor? Now that shocks people. That shocks people, because especially people who are familiar with the Christian Bible, where it says, the meek shall inherit the earth, and the poor, you have to treat the poor as if they're, to some extent holier. It's not that you're supposed to treat them bad. It says you don't show deference to the rich, and the same thing, but it also says you don't show favoritism to the poor, which means if they come to you in court, you don't assume that the poor person is telling the truth.
Mhm.
We don't set up situations so that people are given preference or given other opportunities that it's not fair for somebody who's happens to be wealthier than that person. It upsets people sometimes because it goes against their sensibilities that the poor should always be favored. That's not what the Torah says. The Torah says people should be treated equally. Judge your kin fairly, which means don't take into consideration their economic level. Keep them, honor them, judge them fairly. Tzedek, and that's the word that's used there. You have to judge your kin fairly. Betzedek tishpot amitecha. In justice, you shall render judgment. What does the King James say for that, Mary? It's better translation. Yeah. In righteousness or judgment, you shall judge your kin. So I think that's, or your, what does it say? Your nation, your thy neighbor. Yeah. So there you go. It's a quite evolved law, by the way, and it prevents people from being taken advantage of, but it also protects people from getting unfair exemptions from justice because of their economic level.
I wonder if this is where, Lady Justice is blind.
So it's interesting. So John's question about justice being blind. So what's interesting about it in Judaism is that it's partly that, but it's also this idea of the scales, right? The scales being balanced. And so if we put other things on the scale, which we're not supposed to, then we're tipping the scales of justice. And that's one of the things that I think Judaism has kind of stressed, is that there has to be equity, there has to be justice applied across the board, and not taking into consideration someone's nationality, their ethnicity, and their social standing. And so that's one of the reasons why Jews are offended by people who take advantage of their social standing. But at the same time, we really need to be also offended by people who are given exemptions from justice because of their poverty. And so that also strikes us as something that's unfair. I mean, it should. It doesn't, I guess, strike everybody as unfair, but it should strike us as unfair when somebody is given essentially a pass because they were poor,
It seems to me they're saying equal opportunity, but not always equal outcomes. You can't change the scale and weigh it for either the poor or the rich.
Yeah, equal opportunities, equal justice,
and not equal outcomes.
Well, there's no way to guarantee it, but the most important thing is you can't force the outcome by giving partiality and tipping the scales. You can't do that.
They're trying to do in some schools.
It's happening across in the country in many ways. So this is a problem because, again, it doesn't create equity. It creates inequity, and that's something that's frustrating. Should be frustrating for us. It's definitely not the way the Torah wants it to be. So render decisions, mishpat is the justice is supposed to be done. It's supposed to be done on a level playing field, if you will. And the level playing field is not tipping it one way. So,
and weren't there different colors of skin at that time because they don't
of course there were.
There had to be, and
but
what don't go by the color of the skin.
Correct. And not only doesn't it say that here, it doesn't say it anywhere in the Torah.
No.
Not one place in the Torah does it say anything about skin color. And there absolutely were different skin colors. There definitely were different ethnic characteristics. The Bible never says anything about that.
Right.
Which means that they had a society where they didn't have to say anything about that. They didn't say, "Oh, well, you have to treat people who look like a certain way because there was no assumption that would have been done."
Right.
Now you could say, "Well, how do you know that?" Because the Torah never says that it was done. No, the Torah never says that there was a problem with it, and it would have. It calls out when people. Look, it just called out economic inequity. We know it did. And it was. We know that's human nature. Some guy comes to court and the guy was richer, and maybe they said, "Hey, maybe this guy's going to kick me back a bribe." Well, the Torah says you can't do that. It's going to say it again, by the way. This is not the end of it. Do not deal basely with members of your people. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow Israelite. I am the Lord. Now, that's kind of what they're talking about here. Don't make money off of, victimizing people in your community. That's done all the time in our community. Yeah, John.
That dovetails back to, and I'm reading the comments as we're going.
Yep.
That dovetails back to 14. Because part of the comments here says, just reading it here, right? So it's not, Sifra, right? The Midrash, right, says, therefore, Sifra therefore understands the commandment figuratively. Do not give self-serving advice to one who is ignorant or inexperienced. Right? So they all kind of dovetail together, right? So it's not a handicap or a disability, but if I know something more than you, right? That's
Yeah, well, so that's, you can make the argument that's the definition of insider trading.
right.
And insider trading, you can get in trouble for. Because we understand that if someone's gaming the market, look, I talked about this yesterday in class. I mean, this is a problem that we used to feel it like with stocks and with, like we're playing in a field where we're like, oh, you have no idea. You have no idea what you're doing.
It's not level.
But now, I mentioned this yesterday, this is happening to us on a daily basis because it's happening every time we go into a restaurant, every time we go into a hotel, every time we're going to, buy a ticket for an airplane. We don't know what's going on. We have no idea what's happening. There's no market. It doesn't make any sense. And so we feel like we're being gamed all the time. And that's a problem that we are living with today. And it's frustrating because we feel like we're being taken advantage of. And this has gotten accelerated since COVID, that people feel like there's a game going on here that we're not privy to. So it used to be with stocks. But then, look, I mean, obviously with stock information, it's frustrating.
And if you pass a law about a company gets special privileges or less privileges, and you pass the law, but as soon as you know what the outcome is going to be, you buy or sell the stock.
Well, they're discussing that in Congress. They're talking about that in Congress right now. They're talking about that.
That's
They're
right.
talking about that in Congress this moment. So yeah, it's been an ongoing problem. And again, I think it's seeped down into a lot of what's going on. And what's weird is, again, it's not just the things that we would expect it to be. It's happening all over the place.
Yes.
And yeah, it's not fair. And it's again, we saw what had happened a few years ago with the college admissions situation where people were taking advantage of these people that were cheating their way into colleges. So yeah, we know it's happening. Again, I just think it's happening so much now that we don't even, like, it's happening on so many levels of things that we like just encounter on a daily basis. So it's sad and it's frustrating. And again, it's like, you're like, how did I not know this? I don't like that feeling, and I don't want anyone else to have that feeling. So it's frustrating, really frustrating. So look, with that being said, I mean, if I'm responsible for it, yeah, it really bugs me. Like, I'm still checking. It's a silly admission right now, but if I see the price of the hotels in Israel are really, really expensive right now. But I check them all the time. And I check, even though we already have booked our hotels and people have already paid for the hotels. If I see that the hotels that we booked have gone down, I checked them this morning. I will get on with the travel company and say, why is it that the price has gone down? And I feel like I've locked in a price that's not fair. Now, as it turned out, they've gone up, so I feel like I'm done well by my people. But if it went the other way, I would hammer them and I would say, you got to do something now. So, that's the way I look at it, because I wouldn't like it, and I feel that if I'm responsible for people's money, I don't want to do that either. So I feel even more responsible to some extent. There's stuff that I'll deal with that I'll suck it up, but if it's other people, I don't suck it up. So
Talking about insider trading,
yeah.
when I worked for Anthem, the story goes that they signed an agreement to buy another company on a Friday. The people that were involved in that had to spend the weekend at the office. I'm serious. And then Monday morning, when they announced it, they went home.
Oh, so they couldn't.
They were afraid that it would be legal.
Yeah, look, I mean, so I sometimes people follow the rules and they enact rules to make that happen. But sometimes people get away with it. That's all I can tell you. Look, I don't, I mean, I'm gonna out anybody, but yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, so these laws, John, are connected. Now, here's a real important one. And this one, gosh, we could talk about it the whole night. You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. That's by itself pretty important. But we're not going to talk about that until we read the next line. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your members of your people. Love your fellow, for parentheses, Israelite as yourself. I am Adonai. Now, I don't like the Israelite being there. The translation usually is love your fellow or love your neighbor as yourself. I am Adonai. Now, this law is the most famous law in the Torah. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? Ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those three words, most people, when they're going to Jewish day school or wherever they're going, yeshiva, wherever else, they learn those words. They are translated differently. Again, Mary, the King James says, love your neighbor. Yeah. And that is,
Mine says it.
yeah, love thy neighbor as thyself, right? Here it says, love your fellow Israelite as yourself. Now, of course, the reason that it says that is because the word in Hebrew, re'echa, is your fellow or your kinsman. Re'echa has a connotation of either kinfolk or your neighbor or your countrymen. It does not necessarily mean every person that you ever have met. So they didn't really know what to do with it, which is why they translated it with the parentheses with Israelite. Because it doesn't say love everybody as yourself. It doesn't say that. Now you could say, well, they just used a word in Hebrew that is the person next door to you. But it's also possible that, I'm not saying it is, and please don't say that I said that you're not supposed to love everybody. But there's also a possibility that that was not the intention of it in the first place. It is possible by the language that's actually used here that it's talking about, as the way they translated it here, your people. Love your people as yourself. Again, it doesn't mean you're supposed to hate everybody else, but given the context here, look at the previous, look at the rest of the sentence. The previous part of the sentence says, you shall not take vengeance or bear grudge against members of your people. B'nei amecha.
Right.
Okay? So that's why, and we've talked about this before, especially again, Tuesday morning, the biblical structure, the biblical sentence and doublet form is to say the same thing two different ways, or just use a synonym in the clause. The first part of the clause is, well, actually, this doesn't have a first part of the clause, but well, it does. You shall not take vengeance or bear grudge against members of your people. And they put a period there. Love your Israelite as yourself. So if B'nei Amecha is synonymous with Re'echa, it means B'nei Amecha. It means the children. What's the translation in the King James?
The children of thy people. And it's not a period, it's a comma.
Okay, there you go. So there they actually did it as a clause. Look, they did it as two sentences here, which breaks it up more. It does a period.
It does, but it says your kinsfolk.
Yeah. So kinsfolk definitely is more of your. Well, it seems to me that kinsfolk is more your people than fellow. Right. Because fellow, now, it's translated in other translations. I don't know. Are you there, Glory?
I'm here. Mine says, do not hate your brother in your heart.
So,
Yeah, I have almost one,
so brother is even more related, though also, of course, brother also is also used as a word for fellow. We don't even use the word fellow anymore, but it's also, hey, what's up, brother? So we also use it for people that aren't literally our brother, but our colleagues, our friends. So look, it's possible based on the structure that it is your people. That there's a sense that this is not necessarily for everybody. That doesn't mean that you hate other people. It doesn't say that, but it also kind of would be consistent with this idea that the Bible says in other places, if an Amalekite comes into your house, you kill them, or if you see an Amalekite, you kill them. So you can't clearly love the Amalekite. So it wouldn't really make sense in the context of the Torah for it to say you got to love everybody. There is an understanding that, again, there's a difference between loving and hating people, and definitely a difference between killing them.
Right.
And there's a difference between loving someone and tolerating them and being nice to them. But loving them is clearly something that is reserved for a relationship, and maybe even specifically the relationship being people that are part of your tribe. I'm not arguing in favor of it. I'm just telling you what the context of it probably was. Today, the words are used, I see them on bumper stickers. I actually see them in Hebrew. I've seen them on bus benches. And in Encino, I've seen it just in Hebrew, which means that they assume that there's people there who need that reminder and who can read it only in Hebrew, by the way. It's only in Hebrew. So it's a beautiful passage. It's a beautiful call to golden rule, right?
Yeah.
Every religion has a version of this. This is our version of it. It's a beautiful thing to think about, really loving those people, because loving them implies, again, a level of care and concern that, again, is deeper than just saying, hey, how you doing? Waving at somebody. If you love somebody, when you see them on the street, you go up to them and maybe you hug them. You don't just wave at them or nod at them. You don't nod at somebody you love.
Right.
So this is another level. This is another relationship level, which, again, maybe you aspire to with your fellow people. But again, the ancient Israelites never could have imagined that we live in the assimilated world that we live in today, where our fellow could be people of all backgrounds.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, 100%, they're not from our faith and from our family. And so it's not possible for us to understand these words anymore as being our neighbor, who's happened to also be from our people. Because if you live in Santa Clarita, the chances that they're Jewish are pretty low. So the reality, of course, is that we can understand this in our day as being a lot more wide than from the standpoint of the background of these people. But yeah, I mean, when people only interacted with their people within a 50-mile radius or 25-mile radius, by nature, they were part of their tribe. So it's a beautiful phrase, ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. It's beautiful. Should always think about it. Should always be something we aspire to. Abraham Lincoln very famously said, when they asked him what church he went to, he said, I'll go into any church where the words love your God, ve'ahavta Adonai Elohecha, and ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, if they're above those doors, I'll go to that church. If they live by those principles, I'll go to that church. So that was his answer about religion.
Mhm.
And he actually, at the time, of course, when he said that, you could say that because they didn't necessarily have a religious litmus test on presidents at those days, although they were all Christian. They didn't grill them on what church they went to, and he didn't go to church a lot. But he also was, of course, quoting Jesus, who said the same thing. When Jesus was pressed by his disciples, what are the most important laws in the Torah? They wanted to grill him on that, which we also have Jewish versions of that story. Rabbi Hillel being confronted and saying, teach me the Torah on one foot. Well, Jesus essentially is confronted by the people as well and say, what are the most important laws, Jesus? What's the Torah? And he said famously, ve'ahavta, ve'ahavta. That's all he said. The translation in the Christian Bible is love God and love your fellow man. So he taught it with the words ve'ahavta, love, and love God and love your men, love your fellow man. So this is a teaching that Jesus had based on the golden rule as it is in the Torah. So this is, it works in English, I guess you could say. It worked in Hebrew when Jesus said it, but that's not the whole context. Because as much as it may or may not apply to everybody that we meet, or only the people in our group, that's not the full context. It also says, don't take vengeance or bear grudge against members of your people. So what it's also saying is, part of loving them, and one could actually say it goes hand in hand with it, and as John pointed out, these laws all seem to dovetail into each other. What also is going on here is this idea of not bearing a grudge. Don't hold on to the anger. Don't bear the grudge. And again, of course, it doesn't say on everybody, but it does say on your fellow people, on your group. Don't take vengeance on them and don't bear a grudge. Now, that's really powerful. And of course, it's very hard to do. Some would say it's like the hardest thing to do. But again, in the Torah's calculation, as God lays it out, this is God's words, because he says, I am Adonai. He ends it with, I am Adonai, right? You can't bear a grudge against somebody if you love them.
It also implies forgiveness. So you don't carry grudges. You need to have forgiveness.
Thank you, Joyce, right? It's about forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's letting go and not bearing a grudge.
Right.
And of course, on the next level too, is not actually taking vengeance on the person.
Right.
But let's go further and let's dovetail further, to use John's word, because what actually comes before that, which we didn't comment on. Now, as much as it's important not to bear a grudge, according to the Torah, again, not hating your kinsfolk, the same word there, achicha, there is brother. Do not hate your brother in your heart. And again, all these words are used here, right, Mary? There it says probably brother. I'm sure it says brother there. Achicha is almost always translated as brother. And here in the same repetitive in the words, reprove your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. Kin here is amitecha. Again, that same word amitecha, right? Which is amecha or amitecha. The word am, like Beth Ami, your people, your nation. We also use the word today, am is nation. But in those days, it meant more of your people, not more than your tribe, your larger grouping. So, by the way, the same word applies in Arabic. They call it the Ummah, which is the Muslim collective, is called the Ummah. But in Hebrew, the Am is our people, right? It's our people. So these are all people. I will say that. All of them say that. Can they be applied to other people? Of course. Rabbis say it's not just Jews that you're supposed to. But look at that's not the point. The point is, we've talked about that too much, actually. The purpose of this discussion is looking at these two lines together.
Mm-hmm.
It also says in here, reprove them. And the words here are chocheach tochiach. It's a repetition. What does the King James say? Rebuke. Glory, what does your translation say for reprove?
Rebuke.
Rebuke.
Yes.
The word in Hebrew is actually two words, chocheach tochiach, which is the word chocheach tochiach. It's actually repeated. None of the translations, or does anyone's translation say you shall surely reprove? Or just says reprove, or rebuke? Just says you rebuke?
Mine
Why?
just says rebuke. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not
No. You reprove your kin frankly, right? There's
Yes.
no translation in our translation here. There is no frankly here. What does the King James say? Reprove? Just rebuke your kin? Okay, here. So, and that's it. So the hochech tochiach is an emphatic. That's a form of Hebrew where the word's repeated twice, which is why, Gloria, your translations I would probably go with is the most accurate, which is reprove your kin frankly. Surely you shall reprove him strongly. The reproof is there. The rebuke is there. I mean, we don't even use the word reprove. Rebuke is a more understandable word, but we don't even use the word rebuke anymore. We could say call out. I don't even know what words we do use in English because we don't even do this anymore. But it's hold them accountable.
Right.
Hold them accountable. Because if you don't, the consequence, it says, otherwise you'll incur guilt on their account. Because if you don't, you will incur guilt on their account. You'll be responsible for their chet, or their sin. That's probably, well,
Mhm.
what's the full line in Mary in the King James? Reprove your kinsmen? Yeah. That's the word chet. Sin. It's not even guilt. It's a bad translation. It's don't take on their sin. Guilt implies you have a feeling about it, by the way, right? Guilt implies you feel bad about it. I feel guilty. No, it's actually in the Hebrew, and it does say guilt, because guilt is a legal definition. But it literally means you take on their sin if you don't do something about it. If you knew they're doing it and you didn't stop them from doing it, you're responsible for it. That's what the Torah just said. So you got to be serious about it. If you see somebody doing something wrong, you have to call them out on it. Because if you don't, you're partially responsible for it. Now, people don't want to hear that. But the Torah actually says you're accountable for it. Now, if it's in the context of your people, then you can understand that. Right? You're not going to call out your neighbor who you don't talk to. Well, you could, but you're probably, well, nowadays you could get shot. But, you know, you're not going to probably call out your neighbor and say, hey, you're doing something wrong if you don't have a relationship with them. You'll say, which not your business. It's not your business. Right? A lot of people would say that. Torah says, within your people, you can't do that. Yeah, John.
You know, the comments.
Yep.
In this Torah, I think, go even deeper. And it says, you shall not hate your kinsman in your heart. The Torah, unlike ordinary legal codes, is concerned not only with actions, right, we were discussing, but also with attitudes. It recognizes how destructive bottled up resentment can be and cautions us against wrong feelings as well as wrong acts.
Yeah, well, we were going to get to that in a second.
Sorry.
No. We are, because that's that's the full consequence. But before we get onto that issue, which is what are the consequences of that to us? Let's just pause again, just throw it out there. The responsibility we have of calling people out for things that they've done wrong is not an easy thing to do. Even when they're our friends, even when there are people who are in our family. But I would posit that that's the only people we ever call out anymore. But, you know, look, I should say, most of us don't. If we're in a position where we can, or that we want to, look.
Would that include children, your children? Yeah, it would have to.
Yeah, and that would probably be where most of us, let's face it, Joyce, that's where most of us actually, that's all we ever do.
Yeah.
Is call out our kids, which is unfortunate because, well, they need to be called out. Because there's opportunity.
If they're doing wrong.
Yeah, there's opportunity and kind of, you'd say, responsibility to do that. We'd say that without a doubt. But unfortunately, that's usually the only time we do it. Now, look, it's not easy to do. And the rabbis go on and on about how to effectively call out somebody and doing it in a way that's effective. One of the most important ways, and when they discuss this, and it's discussed in the Talmud, how to reprove somebody. And it actually is not just in the Talmud, it's in the modern codes. And it goes on throughout Jewish law, because this is a tough thing to do. And most people don't want to do it because they don't want to deal with the consequences themselves of being hated because they did it. We'll get to John's point in a
Or
second.
feeling guilty because they did it.
Well, yeah, though you're really not supposed to feel guilty because you didn't do it. But the point is, there's ways to do it. And the Torah doesn't really say here what to do, but the Talmud does. And the Talmud says, for example, you don't call out somebody in public.
Right.
You don't tell them in front of other people, hey, you screwed up. You pull them aside and you tell it to them in a serious and a loving way. But you don't call them out in front of other people. It says that. I mean, the Talmud actually said you can't humiliate somebody by doing this.
That's
Right.
like airing your dirty laundry.
It's
It's interesting. So this is where the root is. This is the root of that. No, it's just, right, I've always taught my kids, right? Praise in public, chastise in private.
Yeah. Yeah. And
This is the root of that.
it is a Torah principle, which is unfortunately, especially in our society today, it's the exact opposite, where people literally will say things to people in public on purpose to humiliate them. So it's we've gone mad on this, we've gone crazy because there is no serious chastisement, there's no serious rebuking. It's all done in front of people, and it's done for media attention, it's done to humiliate people. So look, it's easy to do, especially when there's no consequences to do it, and when people get paid handsomely to do it. I mean, there's people who built their whole comedic careers on tearing down other people. Look, the funny thing is that one of the most successful people of that was Don Rickles, Jewish, right? But Don Rickles did it in a context where people knew that what they were doing, they knew what they were getting into. When they walked into a comedy show with him, they could
I saw him.
start. Yeah, he did that to the audience. He didn't do it to just
He
people.
always had a smile on his face.
And he also did it because it was part of what he got known for. And people invited him to do roasts. They wanted him to. But in reality, people don't have when they have no capability of defending themselves, it actually goes against Jewish law, because you're actually humiliating them, which we'll get to, is something else you can't do. You can't humiliate somebody. So when you're reproving somebody, it's not an easy thing to do, but you have to do it, and you have to do it in a way that's going to maintain the other person's dignity. And hopefully, again, get them to actually respond and actually get them to change their behavior.
Is there anything in the Torah about bullying? Because that seems to be on the growth now in our community.
Well, look, you just read one part, which is about bullying somebody with, specifically with disabilities, right? So that's
Right.
one thing we read. And some people would say that applies on a larger level, but we'll get to some of the things
Okay.
as far as
But
how-
what I'm seeing is it's a growing
Yeah.
problem.
And I will tell you this, Joyce, the Torah, I think, assumes to some extent. I don't know that the Torah could have ever predicted that our society would become the way it has, where that type of behavior
There's
is.
so much wisdom in there.
Yeah, but it's become so prevalent
Yeah.
that people, like, we don't even think about it anymore. The bullying that goes on is everywhere, and so
Yes.
like it's become rampant, and it's gotten worse with social media. So it's gotten much worse. It's accelerated exponentially. So I don't even know if the Torah could have imagined that our society would have degenerated to the level of bullying that goes on. It's difficult to imagine it even from when I was a kid to now.
But if you follow the Torah, there wouldn't be bullying.
Yeah. And again,
There's
to get
wisdom
back to,
there.
yeah.
Ancient wisdom.
And again, I think to some extent, it's gone beyond even what could have even been imagined. And to get to what John's original point, what he quoted from before, is that the consequence of being able to reprove somebody or rebuke somebody then allows us not to bear a grudge.
Mhm.
Now, again, you could say, still bear a grudge against the person even though rebuked them. But what's interesting about it psychologically is that if we have attempted to get them to stop doing what they're doing and they still do it, it's not that you would still would bear a grudge against them, but what's interesting about it is oftentimes it does free us and allows us to forgive them a little bit more, not because they did still do the same stupid thing, but because we did our part. I think what happens psychologically, and Joyce will probably either, I think she's going to confirm what I'm about to tell you, is one of the things that's hard for people when somebody that we love or care about does something that upsets us, is that if we could have stopped them from doing it, or if we feel responsible in some way for what they've done, rather than just forgive them, we have to overcome our own feelings of humiliation and our own feelings of disappointment in ourselves, and our own feelings of inadequacy because we were not able to stop them, or we couldn't stop them, or we didn't try to stop them. And so then we feel stupid, and it makes us even harder for us to forgive ourselves, because we sort of, oh, look, person went down the toilet and I could have said something, or I wanted to say something, but I was embarrassed to say something, or I didn't have the strength to say it, or I was worried. And
Or I
then,
said something and was not successful, so it's still my fault.
well, yeah,
And I get that too.
that happens. That happens. But in my experience, and when I've talked to people about it before, and when I've experienced it myself, it's easier for me to forgive when I actually do feel like I tried to do something, mainly because I can say, I don't have that feeling of humiliation. Like I knew better and I didn't do it. And that's me. Maybe it's me. I don't know. But that's the way I feel. I feel that when I feel like I've done something to try to stop that person from doing the wrong thing, then I did my part. And then I don't bear that grudge. I don't have that anger in my heart because I did reprove. And all these things, again, I think these two verses where you could argue there's 4 different ideas or even more ideas here in these commandments. So if you look at them, do not hate your kinsfolk in your heart, right? Don't hold it in. Reprove your kin, incur no guilt on their account. You could say that's 3 things, but they're all connected. And then you shall not take vengeance or bear grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow Israelite as yourselves. I think those lines all come together. I think
Yes.
they're all part of that, which is so weird because the only part that people pay attention to is love your neighbor as yourself. That's the only part that they see there. And there's so much more there. The connections on if you want to call it the ethical basis for relationships,
Right,
are all of those lines. It's
Yes.
not, you could even
it's
say
not just the last line.
it starts even before that, but where it really comes to, I think, these 4 lines, these 2 lines in text, 17 and 18, and these different ideas, these different clauses, I think they all go together. And I think that pulling them out and picking out some, like you also shouldn't just pick out reprove the people, right? We don't want to just say, oh, I'm really good at that. I always can tell people what they've done wrong. But they all go together. And I think the consequence of reading all of this in context and not just reading, the Torah says, love your neighbor as yourself. What does it really mean? And it's part of being able to have relationships with people that are healthy, that allow for forgiveness, that allow for, honest discourse and honest, in some cases, honest criticism. Constructive criticism, but honest criticism. It doesn't say just pull people down, but it says if they're doing something wrong, call them out on it. It's not saying, hey, I don't like what you're wearing today. It's saying, you're committing a crime. You're dealing unethically right now. You're making a mistake that is going to cause damage. I'm just telling you, if you've done it, then you can hopefully move on, not move on and forget, but move on with forgiveness. So I think this is a beautiful couple of verses. I don't know. It's a lot better than the next verse, which is one of the stranger verses in the Torah. But again, the Torah oftentimes goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. This isn't ridiculous. I don't want to say that. There's actually a very important law within this. But some people go, are you serious? Is this really in the Torah? And it is. You shall observe my laws. Okay, that's the introduction. So the next line. You shall not let your cattle mate with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. You shall not put on cloth from a mixture of two kinds of materials. And the Torah just say you can't do a nice poly cotton blend. No, what it did say is you can't do a linen cotton blend. But yes, it did say that you're not allowed to mix substances. Now, this is a law that's still followed in the Orthodox observant world. They will check for this word right here. You can look it up. It's called shatnez. That's the word, shatnez. In Hebrew, in Yiddish today, shatnez is mixture cloth. Cloth that isn't pure. It's not pure wool or not pure linen. Or wool, yeah, wool, which comes from the animal,
Or silk,
or silk,
or silk.
or cotton, which comes from the earth, from a plant. Linen comes from a plant. You're not supposed to mix animal-based garments with plant-based garments. Now, today, of course, a lot of our garments are made out of chemicals, and so it doesn't even matter. But in the ancient world, they didn't like that mix. Now you could say, well, why is it totally movement? Yeah. And you have to look at the whole thing, right? So the cattle mating with other things, sowing your field with different kinds of seed. The Torah does not want people to mix things that are not supposed to be mixed. So you could say that's kind of like, is that really on God's high priority list? Well, there is an understanding in traditional Judaism. I would say it kind of spreads over into other parts of different cultures and religions now too, is that things that shouldn't be mixed together shouldn't be mixed together. So what does that go to? Let's just flip back just for a moment, folks. Let's flip back to the moment when everything was created. The earth was created, and God said, let there be light. And it said God separated the light from the darkness. God immediately starts separating. God immediately creates by separating. So what else is God doing? God separates the water from the water. Mabdil, separation. God separates the waters from those dry lands. God causes vegetation to come out. Seeds. And I guarantee you the King James is going to be a lot better than this one on here. Because it's actually going to translate it. Can you flip back, Mary, to Genesis 1, chapter 12?
And the earth brought forth grass and herb, yielding seed after his kind. And the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good.
Now notice that this translation that we have in front of us doesn't even translate that word. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind. So it translated the word leminehu, and also down here, leminehu, there's the Hebrew word. It's used twice, leminehu and leminehu. According to its kind, not of every kind. That's a bad translation. In its kind, what does your translation say, John? You didn't choose.
12?
Yeah, for Genesis 1:12.
The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind.
Yeah, it's the same translation.
Of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit, with seed in it.
Yeah, it's a bad translation.
The bad translation?
Bad translation, because it's the same translation here, every kind. Lemineu doesn't mean in every kind, it means according to its kind.
Mm,
The point being is that God creates things in their place.
So-
God created things that belonged in a certain place, according to its kind.
So you're saying the author of this Torah
The translator.
has,
Yeah.
well, yeah, but I'm sure there was a committee.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's not like.
No,
they
the
had an
translator.
agenda.
yeah. Translators, I don't know if they thought about the consequences of that translation. Because it's a bad translation because it underlines a concept in the Torah, which is that God created things in their place. God separates things because they belong in a place.
and apples don't grow on a pear tree and pears
Yeah.
don't grow on, well,
So what our ancestors saw is that things that were supposed to be in their place shouldn't be mixed up.
right,
If you mix things up, it causes a problem. Now, some people are going to say, wait, what are the consequences of that? Does that mean that black people and white people can't marry each other? Absolutely not. Because as we said at the beginning, there's nothing in the Torah that ever talks about skin color.
right,
Doesn't say that anywhere. There is an understanding in the Torah that God put things in their place for a reason, and that we shouldn't undo creation. And so the understanding of sowing seeds together, which is what this said, right? When we look at the line from Leviticus, when we look at the line, it says specifically, don't mix seeds together,
mhm,
right?
yes.
What does yours say, Genesis 25,
Ooh,
Genesis 1:25?
I think it's the same as you. I think the translations, these are both JPS translations, so they're probably going to be very close. I think this is a 1980. I think this is a 1986 JPS translation. I'm not positive, but I think that's the one that they use. What does 25 say?
No, it's about wild beasts, and so I thought we were talking about cattle, right? Not
does.
mixing species.
So it's
creating
going to say the same thing, right? Of every kind, right? That's what yours says.
Yeah.
Guess what? It's the same word, leminehu.
Mhm.
Okay, it's the same word, leminehu. So yeah, animals also, it's good to point out.
But sometimes if you put two species together, you get the next generation that cannot produce itself.
Absolutely, Joyce. And that's why in the ancient world, they were already making mules.
Right,
And that was considered to be a problem because
Yes.
they said, look, if human beings try to crossbreed animals, they end up being sterile.
right,
And it's not just,
and
it's
that's
not,
not good.
also
because you
lions.
have to populate the earth.
it's also lions and tigers. There's
Or
an
as Debbie said, a bird can't mate with the fish, where would they live?
there he was also talking about,
Get what he's talking.
God bless you, Mary.
he was talking about, again, people of different backgrounds marrying each other. But, yeah, there was definitely this understanding through Tevia's time, still our ancestors still felt that there are differences and those differences should be respected and they should also not be broached. Now, the problem, of course, is that, now we are pioneers, beyond pioneers in genetic engineering, and
Right,
we have no idea what we're going to create. Look, a lot of people say that the biggest danger to humanity is not computers and it's not AI and it's not nuclear war. It's what kind of genetic
right,
thing we're going to create. Now, some people say, well, they used to be worried it was going to be some kind of animal monster, whatever. But as we know today, it's probably not an animal or monster, it's probably a virus. And so the viruses, especially if this virus was created in a lab,
mhm,
was created by people who are genetically engineering viruses. We're doing it, the Chinese are doing it, the Russians are doing it.
right,
Anybody with the technology is doing it. Anybody with a lab in their basement can do it today with genetic splicing materials and technology that you can buy on a computer, with your Amazon account. So this is a real fear. The Torah
and it is,
recognizes that fear and actually places it inside the words of the Torah. I would say maybe one of the biggest lessons, which again, we would say, is it really important for the Torah to tell us what kind of clothing we can wear? But I will tell you, the Torah just gave us a warning.
Yes, it did.
which is don't try to mess with the way God did things.
We did it 3 times.
Yeah.
Animals. Seeds.
Yep.
And what you put on your body.
Yeah, which is also organic materials that are not necessarily, again, one could argue, animal and plant mixed together.
But a lot of these laws are really for, if you think about it, for people's safety also.
Yeah. Yeah,
For safety and
That's simple.
propagation of more.
yeah. So we're undoing this. I mean, we're literally in our lives undoing this. Now, some people would say, well, it's, I agree with you. I never would. I don't.
You're
But,
right.
but one of the things that the Torah is actually telling us is that there is a consequence, there can be a consequence to creating these kinds of things. The argument, of course, is that we're, save lives if we can genetically engineer, some genes that can fight cancer cells. So, the argument is let's do it to try to help life. The problem is the genie's out of the bottle and it can't be done.
Yes.
And I would say, it's
Well,
been
they're
done.
gonna eventually start growing, like if you need a liver transplant, they're gonna grow a liver.
Of course, so all those arguments are there. Look, people say that's how we've gotten better tomatoes and we've gotten better whatever. But the problem is that it's already out of the bottle. And I am fearful of this. I do believe that this,
And we now get tasteless tomatoes.
No, but aren't they?
No, really.
Big valves.
that's different, right? So pig valve is different because when you're actually using something that exists already, well, all you're doing is you're using
Okay,
you're using the piece.
Sorry.
You can make the argument that, you're killing a pig, but even I, as a vegetarian, would say, kill the pig to save a human life. I mean, I'm not crazy. I am crazy, but not that way.
Yeah,
But the other way, I'm not crazy, I'm not sure. No, I do think that maybe the Torah does give us a warning about doing this. And
Yes.
we're living in a world that does not take this seriously.
Right.
And I think it's at our own peril, and I think it's already probably too late. Honestly, I mean, I don't sit there and agonize over it. I just sit there and keep me up at night. But it does bother me that it almost is inevitable that we will create something that we can't control. So
And they have, because with gain of function research,
look,
they did it.
we probably, human beings probably created COVID.
I think that,
It's too perfect.
Yes.
And it came too quick. So look, I don't know. Look,
And the vaccine was already in.
people on
production.
all different sides of this argument have said it.
Yes.
Fauci has said it. People who don't like Fauci have said it. Everybody's.
Yeah.
There are people on all sides who said it. So I believe it's been done. It was done, and if it wasn't released, it was still done. So we have much worse than that. So it is scary. So the Torah does give us a warning. Look, I have a theory. Of what God is, where the Torah came from. I think it came from the future. And I think somebody in the future gave our ancestors text to try to keep humanity alive. And I believe that if you had to couch these rules in something, you said it was from God. You said it, and it is to some extent from the ways to keep us alive. I believe these laws are too intelligent to
Right.
simply, whatever you want to say. If it's not from God, it's from some way of knowing these kinds of things that people in the past couldn't have understood.
Right.
This is one of them.
Aliens.
Whatever, somebody gave us this rule that would actually save us when we actually could get to a point where we could actually do this. I don't know. It's one of those laws that you look at, you go, that's silly, but it's not really silly because it may actually be the one thing that can keep us alive.
Right.
Now,
Unless God had experience with other,
Galaxies.
look, for people who say, look, I'm not going to argue because I believe it. If the Torah was written in the language of man, if men are responsible for it, which is why there's laws in it or discrepancies or things that are anachronistic that shouldn't belong there. fine. But then you still can't explain to me how somebody would have known that without knowing. So that's why I'm saying if somebody from the future was going to give someone in the past a law so that they could stay alive, that's the law. If I'm sitting there in a lab and going, do I want to engage in genetic engineering that's going to create some new something, I'm going to say, look, the Torah does tell me not to do this. It doesn't mean I don't study genetics. Of course you should study genetics, but should you actually create a new entity? Torah says no. Look, Torah says no, and guess what else says no? American law says no. That doesn't mean it's not being done, but American law actually prohibits the creation of genetic species. I mean, it actually does. Does the American government do it secretly? Of course they do. I mean,
Yes.
Secretly, when we cloned, that sheep,
that was a little different in the sense that the idea there was not it wasn't cross species genetics. There's no question that it started broaching some ethics. But guess what? We haven't been doing it aggressively because the government feels uncomfortable about it. So, but we don't know what the government is doing. I mean, let's be honest. We have no idea what's being done in labs. DARPA. No one knows what's going on. We don't know what's going on. So I'm not going to pretend to know. I'm not going to pretend to say one way or the other. All right. Now, another law. We're going to read a few more laws here. As you can see, we're going much slower because these laws are all
They're good.
they're all pretty heavy, man. So there you go, John. Wednesday night's not so.
It's Tuesday still GOT.
Okay. So if a man has carnal relations with a woman who is a slave and has been designated for another man, but has not been redeemed or given her freedom, there shall be no indemnity. They shall not, however, be put to death since she was not freed. Now,
There shall be an
indemnity, sorry, there shall be an indemnity. They shall not, however, be put to death. So there is a consequence to taking a woman who is a slave. It's not the same as if she was not a slave, which is that they would have been killed. But there is a consequence to it, which is he has to pay. There shall be indemnity. It's a horrible translation, but look, it's probably actually closer to the King James. What does the King James say for that, Mary? If he has not redeemed her, given her freedom, there shall be.
She shall be scourged, but they shall not be put to death because she was not free.
Well, that's also not quite exactly what the Hebrew says. Yours, John, says the same thing, right? There shall be an indemnity.
There shall be an indemnity.
Yeah, so the King James takes the stand of actually there's a punishment for her.
You gotta pay for it one way or another.
It's not. It's that she actually, there shall be an indemnity means essentially he has to pay. So it isn't seen as an affair, but there is a consequence to it. He has to bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting as a guilt offering for Adonai, a ram of guilt offering. With the ram of guilt offering, the priest shall make expiation for him before Adonai for the sin that he committed. And that sin that he has committed will be forgiven. So it's not the same as sleeping with a man's wife.
Now, if a man has a wife and he brings a guilt offering, everybody knows something happened.
Well, again, in this case, people knew it happened because
He was found out
there's a consequence for it.
There's a consequence.
People know.
I can't just have someone do it for me.
Well, not only that, yeah, you incurred guilt for doing it.
Or if the priest was busy.
Okay.
By the way, the consequence, the reason that translation is so stupid is that part of it is that he has to actually do something religiously, but he also has to pay a price, which is the indemnity in the first place. That's why the translation, I think that's probably a more modern translation now, by the way. Let me just see if there's anything in the commentary on this. Yeah, that's not really helpful.
No,
Well, the reason why Rashi says that it's the Canaanite one. The reason he says it's the Canaanite one, because the Hebrew woman should not be,
Slave.
yeah, well, they shouldn't be a slave.
Right.
They shouldn't be that kind of slave, yeah. Here, he goes even further to say, it's not that she's gonna be married off to a Israelite guy. Well, he's being married to an Israelite guy, but another Israelite servant, which implies that the servant isn't at the same level as the. I mean, that's why Rashi said it.
It's weird.
It's also, again, implying that an Israelite guy, a normal Israelite guy, should not be marrying a Canaanite woman. So he kind of got stuck, and I think he's basing that's based on the Talmud. He didn't just invent that. He's basing that on the Talmud. So, when you come into the land, right? When you enter the land you're coming into, the land of Canaan, and plant any tree for food, you shall regard it as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden for you and not to be eaten. Now, it's not because the land is bad and because you got to wait for 3 years before the land is good. It's because every tree that grows anytime you plant it, not in the first 3 years that you come into the land, but anytime you plant a new tree in the land of Israel, you've got to leave it 3 years alone. You don't pick it for 3 years. And I've talked to gardeners and horticulturists and landscapers about this law in the Torah, which a lot of them don't know. And they've said the same thing. You cannot pick a tree until it grows to maturity.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you stress it.
Yes.
That's the words that they've used. You stress it. Fruit isn't good, and it hampers the ability for the fruit tree to grow more fruit.
Oh,
It doesn't grow as
Jay
much
does
fruit.
that. He doesn't, haven't read this.
Now we know. Now you can tell them.
Wait, 70.
It's in the Torah. Well, actually, you're not even allowed in the third year, right? Because in the fourth year. Because in the fourth year, you bring it to God. The fourth year, you bring it up to the temple.
only in the fifth year can
And
you
in
use
the
the
fifth
fruit.
year, you can use the fruit, and that yield and its yield to you will be increased. I, Adonai, your God. And he says, you will be good if you do that. And you'll get even more fruit if you do it, because that's the right thing to do. Do the right thing and wait till the fifth year before you eat it. And you'll get more for it. I promise you. That's what God's saying. Its yield will be increased. I am Adonai. There you have the words again. I, Adonai, your God. Ani Adonai Elohechem. And here is a line that we've heard before. You shall not eat anything with blood. And then it says, you shall not practice divination or soothsaying. So that's weird because it's grouped together. Yeah. Don't eat
Well,
things with
don't eat,
blood.
well, does that mean don't never eat your meat rare so that it's
No,
still?
milk with meat.
No, it doesn't say. It says not to eat the blood.
Oh, my mother loved her.
So is it allowed to be rare?
Rare.
Yes. But it's not allowed to have blood in it. So what does that mean? It means you can cook it not as far as you'd like. I know you're going to say that, well, what's the difference? But you still have to remove the blood,
Okay,
which is why kosher meat is drained in blood. It's why kosher meat tastes salty, because they put salt on it and got off all the blood. So you can still cook it rare.
okay.
It doesn't have to be, or it doesn't say it has to
And
be
that
cooked.
isn't blood in it, it's just.
As long
that
as the
it isn't
blood
well
isn't
cooked.
in it,
Got it.
it can be cooked, it can be undercooked, it can be well cooked, but it can't have blood in it.
It can't have the blood in the veins.
Yes.
Got it,
And it can't be dripping blood.
got
Can't
it.
be dripping blood. And you shall not practice divination or soothsaying. Seems to be somehow connected to that. Because
That's connected.
maybe people use blood and stuff like that for soothsaying.
Oh,
It's possible that that's
for
also part-
spells and,
Yeah.
and,
and for prophecies, yeah, for oracles.
Ah,
So you're not allowed to drain out
This
that
is
blood.
not telling GOT, the
Yeah,
red.
there you go. So the red blood of what people would use for witchcraft and those kinds of things, not good.
got
They
it.
didn't like it. And it makes for bad practice, because you're gonna start behaving like the Canaanites. Of course, as we read on Tuesdays over and over again, is exactly what they did. And here we get to this thing that we talked about at the beginning. Don't round off the side growth on your head or destroy the side growth of your beard.
What does that mean? Where's,
There's the,
what's considered the side? growth?
there's the peyote again, right? There's the word. And this is the peyote of your head. Well, so let's look at what, for example, what Rashi said. This refers to one who makes his temples exactly like or as hairless as the back of his ears and his forehead
Oh,
by removing the hair on his temples so that the lower edge of the hair that surrounds his head, i.e. the skull, forms a complete circle. Since above the back of his ears and the roots of his hair are situated much higher than his temples, and it is thus only the temples which can prevent an uninterrupted circular line going around his head. And he quotes the Talmud on that. So you can just see that. You can just see this too about not creating bald spots on your head. Now, for a question that some people would say is, why would anyone purposely create bald spots on their head?
My father went bald at 19.
Yeah, but he didn't do that purposely,
No,
right?
not at all.
So why did people do that? Well, of course, we already read about the fact that sometimes people have bald spots because they have skin disease. But it also talks about here people who would shave their head, and they did it on purpose. Why? Because they were probably looking like or following like pagan traditions where people did that. We've never done it. We were not supposed to do it, which is why, again, when we would see priests who did that, in Catholic priests that were doing that, they were following pagan practices of the peoples that they came from. They were not doing that was not a Jewish thing to do. So the same thing goes, of course, for the beard. You're not supposed to cut off your beard on the sides. So do you have to have a beard? That's an interesting question, because there are Jews who believe you have to have a beard, and that if you can, and that you have to have your payas to grow all the way down. Now, the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah doesn't say you cannot do that. The Torah says, and I did not show you the next line, which the Talmud, if you look closely, the Talmud referred to this too. You shall not make gashes in your flesh for the dead, or incise any marks on yourselves. I am Adonai. So the question here is, and again, it seems like these are connected, and some people would even say it's even connected to this line above it, which is practices of the pagans and of the Canaanites, the people that they were going to be living next to, not to behave like they were. And they did these kinds of things. So, look, there are people who obviously take this law very seriously, which is not to cut their beards. Now, you can cut your beard, you just can't cut them on the sides. You can cut your hair, you just aren't supposed to cut the sides of your hair. So people took that literally. The other way of looking at it is you don't, as the Talmud said, you don't shave the sides of your hair so that you just get a little thing on the top of your head. I mean, the only time you ever seen that is like movies where they show monks from the Middle Ages. Like, never see anybody do that anymore. But you do see people doing mohawks, for example. A mohawk from the Jewish standpoint would not be allowed, because you're cutting the sides of your hair and you're not allowing your, again, how long do your sideburns have to be? Some people say you never cut them. That's what peyote are. They're side locks. But you are allowed to cut your beard. You're just not allowed to cut the sides of your beard off and make your beard, probably again, the way if Canaanites had beards, that's what they did. Not every Orthodox Jew has a beard. There are interpretations that, again, you are allowed to shave. It's just how you're supposed to shave. And also, again, whether these gashes or marks that people would make were permanent, were for
Is that
Canaanite
tattooing?
practices. this is the line about tattooing. Now,
Oh,
if you read this line in its totality, well, yes, everyone's saying, oh, wow, is this it? It is. But you wouldn't know that from this,
No.
which is why people have gotten more lenient about tattoos over the last years in Judaism. Up until probably 40 or 50 years ago, Jews did not oftentimes get tattoos. Partly, and again, how do we know that? Because even during World War II, there were a lot of Jews who refused to get tattoos, even though all their friends were getting tattooed. They said, all right, we can't do that. I can't go back home. Can't go back home and have a tattoo. My mom would kill me. That's people, I'm talking about people in the 1940s saying that to their friends, right? I'm not making that up.
you're not making
I
that.
got a witness. I got a witness here. The witness is there. That's not true.
Okay.
That's not true. They told people that, Joanna, and you're absolutely right that they told people that. There's even a Larry David episode. There's a Curb Your Enthusiasm where he finds out his mother has a tattoo, but after she dies. But it was hysterical. But it's all based. That's about nice. The issue about not being buried in the cemetery was because if you didn't follow Jewish law, then you could not be buried in the cemetery. By extension, anything that violated Jewish tradition could have gotten you not buried in the cemetery. Look, the Torah says numerous times you're not supposed to eat milk and meat together. It says numerous times you're not supposed to eat animals with cloven hooves and that don't chew their cud, namely pigs. So it says a couple times. So there's other laws in the Torah that people didn't follow and weren't threatened with that. But I do think that tattoos for a long time were considered to be too Gentile to do.
Right.
And so people didn't want to behave like Gentiles, and that was an issue. So it became less of an issue as, in the last few generations, but mainly it became an issue or less of an issue because as people read the Torah, they realized that the actual Torah injunction is against making incisions on behalf of the dead. Now, one can make the argument that you should never have a tattoo that says the person's life dates on it, which I see all the time, right? People put in memoriam tattoos all over the place. Always, for the parents, God forbid, for a child or a sibling, they'll do that. But here it says you're not supposed to for the dead. Now, again, they probably aren't talking specifically necessarily talking about tattoos. They're talking about cultures where people would cut their skin when somebody died. African cultures to this day, people scar their faces when someone dies to symbolize the tears that they cry for them. And so they'll scar in some tribes will scar their faces right here underneath their eyes. Most people have tattoos today, a little teardrop by their eyes, and then yanked. But that's after they killed somebody.
Right.
They have a teardrop tattoo. But yeah, you're not supposed to gash yourself for that. Now, again, some people say that that's a tattoo. Some people also say, in a very interesting reading of this, I think everyone's translation has the words, I am Adonai, right?
Yes.
I am Adonai. Some people say you're not supposed to incise on your marks that's on your bodies that say, I am Adonai.
Oh.
As long as you don't put the words, I am Adonai. Now, again, that's a clever reading of this, but it says, incise any marks on yourselves.
I am on.
I'm Adonai. Don't write on yourself, I am God.
There too.
I understand that. But some people would say, well, don't put God's name on your body. I've seen people with that. They don't have an issue putting God's name. Not a lot of Jewish people, but I've seen people put Jesus on their
Jesus.
body.
Yeah,
But
I seen it.
clearly there's an understanding here in Judaism that your body is, to some extent, on loan from God
Yes.
and isn't ours to treat poorly or to treat with insensitivity, we would say. Now, as people go through their lives and decide, hey, this is what I want to do. This is, this is who I am. This is what I want to do with my body. People have definitely done that. Now, look, there are people who make the argument, people are going to get bent out of shape because somebody put a tattoo on them. What about if they have plastic surgery? You purposely cut your body. I mean, you could say, oh, I did it and I did it to beautify myself, or I did it to, reconstruct my body or whatever, So people would come up with understandings of this where their incisions were, even though they were voluntary, they're not even just elective, they're actually cosmetic. People could make the argument that's no different. I don't
After
know.
mastectomy, replacement breasts,
Would be, yeah. So one would say, hey,
were toward what, health?
reproductive, reconstruction, and people would say, hey, look, where's the boundary, right?
Yeah,
You got in a horrible fire, aren't you allowed to reconstruct yourself? You had a cancer surgery, aren't you allowed to reconstruct parts of your body?
I would say yes.
So where's the limit? Where do you say that, it's okay in this case, but no in that
And
case?
conservative, reformed, and orthodox might say 3 different things.
People would definitely have different takes on this.
Yeah.
Though even in the Orthodox world, I haven't heard a judgment against elective cosmetic surgery. But I do think it's interesting that this is a law that today is definitely discussed in ways that we never discussed it.
Right.
One of the interesting things that's happened in Israel for the last 20 years is Israel has become, tattoos have become much more popular in Israel. They were Israel was one of the last countries where tattoos became popular, but they're very popular now in Israel. And people even go, when they're in Israel, they'll get tattoos done. It was very hard to get a tattoo done in Israel, even 25, 30 years ago. Much more common today, and more, younger Israelis are much more likely to have a tattoo. But it was really one of the, it lagged behind a lot of Europe and definitely the United States when it came to that. So it's become, it's become more accepted. There were definitely exceptions to the rule because the rabbi said clearly, it says in the Torah that people had their ears pierced. Is that not a gash? And so the answer for that would be, but as long as you do the piercing in a place where it will heal back up, it's not a permanent gash. Oh, so they said, here is okay, here is not okay.
And there are new rules about, different countries have different rules about blood transfusions now. In some countries, you get whatever blood they have, vaccinated or unvaccinated. In some countries, you can get blood from people who have never been vaccinated. Those people don't want spike proteins in their blood. Their change of mRNA.
Yeah, interesting.
Israel, they won't divide the blood between vaccinated and unvaccinated. Mexico does, Switzerland does. There are various
Interesting.
New rules for new diseases.
Interesting. An interesting thing to think about. What does it mean to think about our bodies and the outsides of our bodies as well? We had a rule in my house. None of my girls could get their ears pierced until they were 18. No, 20, until they were out of the house.
Out of the house.
Yeah.
Okay.
Until they were done with college.
No,
My wife didn't have her ears pierced until she was 50.
they all had it now.
No, none of them have tattoo. No, you jumped the gun already. You went beyond that was my point. No, so Rachel got her ears pierced when she was 22. Dina got her ears pierced when she was 21 or 22. Shira just asked me again. She just turned 18, whether she could break the rules because she's always breaking the rules. She's always going further. She's always trying to do what her kids, what her sisters didn't get away. So they always say she gets away with everything, but she's not getting away with this. Though she tried to grind me down even last weekend. No, we're so now people are going to say you're ridiculous, right? I'm ridiculous. I'm not, because I'm very permissive in some ways, and I'm not. It's not like I'm a general at home with my daughters. But I had an interesting idea. First of all, it was easy because Tracy didn't have her ears pierced, which was partly because she was raised in a more traditional home, and her mom still doesn't have her ears pierced. But you can, according to Orthodox Judaism, you can get your ears pierced for beautification purposes. The rabbi said, look, the matriarchs all have their ears pierced. They even have their noses pierced. As long as it's not cartilage or bone, it was not an issue. Now, my logic was this: if I laid a rule down that they couldn't have their ears pierced until they were out of the house, then I created a situation where if that's what they want to do when they're out of the house, then they can make that decision. I taught them that their bodies are sacred and their bodies are a gift. And what did it do, John? It definitely staved off that decision of what they were going to do when they went to college, which included getting a tattoo. So the issue is, I set a boundary, a barrier of something that was maybe overboard, but which created a situation where they saw their bodies as something that, at least while I'm paying the bills, this is not something that we advocate. This is not something that we wanted. So that was what happened. Will it prevent them always? Who knows? I know Rachel, well, I never know. You never know what your kids are going to do. But I do think that they're going to consider that very, very strictly. I mean, we have people in our family that have tattoos. It's not like it's it's unheard of in our family. And it's not like we're going to say that's a bad thing to do, but they're going to definitely consider it as adults, and that there's another barrier. And again, there's no judgment on that on my part that it's a bad thing or a good thing, but I want them to make a decision on their bodies as the mature adults. And so that's a fact. Our minds don't finish maturing, they say, until we're in our 20s. So yeah.
I'm not close.
So I will tell you this: I got them at least to their 20s before they did anything. I will tell you, of all my daughters that push the boundaries, actually, it's not really Shira, because she just wants to get away with stuff younger than her sisters, right? She had a phone when she was 8, when her sisters didn't have their phones until they were teenagers. But no, the interesting thing was the one who pushed the boundaries most was Dina, who got another ear piercing up here the other day, which on her upper part of her ear, which she knew was going to piss me off. So she did it, and whatever. I mean, she's independent, she's on her own, and she wanted to push the boundaries, so she did. She's not going to root for the Padres, Mike, but she's very much a Dodger fan. And it's not the end of the world, but she did know that would push my buttons. So I don't think she did it for that. She did it because she wanted to. But yes, if she's the most free spirited of my daughters. But as I told people, that should be the worst thing that they do. Because what's the next line? We're not going to read it today. Well, we are going to read it because I just showed it to you. But we'll come back in a few weeks and read this. Do not degrade your daughter and make her a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land be filled with depravity. So yeah, we have a responsibility. Again, this was written for men. Occasionally, of course, there were fathers who were gone and the mother was raising the kids. So definitely for their you don't turn your daughter into a zona, into a prostitute. We'll come back in a few weeks and develop and continue on that idea. But I just wanted to tell John, there's good stuff on Wednesdays, John. Don't turn your daughter into a harlot. Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones. All right, everybody, stay healthy. We'll see you soon in a warmer climate.
Bye. Thanks, Rabbi.
All right.
See you in Jerusalem.
Thank you.
We do have services next Friday. I am here next Friday for services. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.